I'm Larry Anderson, editor of SourceSecurity.com, and I'm here today with Atul Rajput, who is the Regional Director for Northern Europe for Access Communication. Your area region includes the UK, Ireland, and the Nordic countries. And we're going to talk about trends in video surveillance. We hear a lot about 4K technology in this industry, obviously. I'm wondering what timeline you see in terms of mass adoption of 4K.
It's an interesting question, Larry. So if we look at the evolution of high definition cameras, we had the first 720p camera, HDTV, and I think around 2008. But it's only the last couple of years it's become probably the de facto standard for IP surveillance cameras. So I think that actually the next stage in evolution is to go to 1080p as the de facto standard. So on that basis, I would probably envisage maybe 3 to 5 years before it becomes a mass consumption product. And an interesting observation is how many people have 4K TVs at home? Probably not that many, and often this is driven by the consumer video industry, whereas today they have many 1080p and 720p cameras.
What obstacles are there in terms of 4K adoption?
I think there's several. First of all, if 4K is 4 times the resolution of 1080p, it's going to have significant impact on bandwidth and storage. And I think the other interesting thing is many cameras are in fixed locations, like looking at a doorway, at a loading bay, and actually a 720p or 1080p is more than enough. For wide area coverage, I think 4K certainly has a great deal to offer, but I think it's finding the right application. But most importantly, we're in the security industry, and it's about optimizing the image quality. It's not all about more and more megapixels, because if you have low light challenges or bright sunshine with wide dynamic range or different environmental challenges, you need to balance both the megapixels and 4K with making sure that it still has optimized image quality.
We also hear a lot about H.265, and which presumably will also have a huge effect on the market. What challenges do you see in terms of adoption of H.265?
Another interesting question, because obviously it's very pertinent right now. I think one observation is both H.265 and H.264, they're actually a broadcasting standard, and that's where it's come from. But H.264 has certainly benefited the industry, and H.265 will as well. But it's relatively easy to implement H.265, but actually it's more important to do it correctly and optimally. We saw that with H.264. You had many different products that supported it, but widely different in performance. So I think it's not just adopting it, it's how you implement it. So that's certainly one of the big obstacles. But I think because H.265 is a broadcast standard, I think the broadcast cameras are always on the move, whereas in most surveillance cameras are in fixed locations. So I think you need to balance H.265 with optimizing actually today H.264. So you can, for example, reduce probably by 30 to 50% bandwidth and storage by using this new dynamic form of compression on H.264, where if you take a scene, you probably don't need to look at top of buildings or in the sky, and you can compress them quite heavily. But where you have movement, like people on the street, is where you get your video for use for evidential quality. There you want the highest quality. So if dynamically a camera is able to adjust the compression where there's movement, you can actually save probably up to 50% on the current standard, which seamlessly integrates with all video management systems. But at the same time, H.265 will certainly come into fruition. But the big challenge is that, as we saw with H.264, you have to wait for video management systems to integrate H.265. It requires more processing power on the servers, and those things take time. So I would envisage it could be 2 to 3 years and becomes more of a de facto standard.
Do we need H.265 in order to have 4K?
That definitely, anything that we can help to reduce bandwidth and storage when you have something like 4K would be extremely beneficial.
Okay. What are the biggest video trends that you're seeing in your Northern European market?
I would say if you take it from an industry segment perspective, where we've seen the biggest uptake, quite tremendous increase actually, is in retail, transportation and critical infrastructure. And actually, just to support that, there's a recent survey, a global survey from the International public transportation authority. It was about 3,400 members of public transport operators, and they said that basically 50% of video systems, they want to use analytics, and actually a large proportion of them want to use video for cost functional purposes, both for security but also to increase operational efficiencies. So we've seen that influencing transport, and so Crossrail, which is one of the largest European rail infrastructure programs, is one area where there's obviously opportunity. Also the Jubilee line extension here on the London Underground, so Axis have an installation at Canary Wharf Underground Station. It's quite topical because it's quite near here at the Excel Centre. And similar to retail, we commission an independent survey every year, and the same feedback comes from all the retailers that the main reason for adopting IP video is integration with business intelligence applications. So they've been big drivers.
If you're looking at the video surveillance market, what would you say is a missed opportunity?
It's an interesting question. There could be probably more than one missed opportunity, but
the biggest missed opportunity.
I think, and I take this back to really the consumer market, and also us as individuals who are evolving. Our expectations have raised. So the days with smartphone, we have applications which sit on the edge in our phone. Everything is at the edge. So the same principle applies to security cameras, having more intelligence, and it's starting to happen, but I would think that from use of analytics on the edge inside the camera, and not just for security but also business optimization, there's certainly a market which is untapped, and one particular area I have to say I think is untapped is the use of audio analytics, because that's a good complement for video for security. And there are some really smart analytics which can sit on the camera that mimic the human ear, that can, for example, detect not what someone's saying, but that they're talking aggressively, and that's usually the precursor to actually a violent act. And it can then be used as a deterrent by automatically having a pre-recorded message saying you're being monitored, to perhaps stop that person going one step further.
Interesting. What would you say has surprised you the most in the video surveillance market in the last year?
Probably the thing that's surprised me the most is, again, taking it back to being a consumer myself, is music in the cloud with Spotify, video in the cloud with Netflix, backup in the cloud from your broadband at home and all your data. Everything is moving towards the cloud, and I think there is a certain proportion of the surveillance market, particularly in what I call the small systems, the 1 to 16 camera segment, where there's perhaps an opportunity for the deployment of video surveillance as a service, which has started. Perhaps, I think, if you look what's happening in the IT and consumer market, which is accelerating quite a lot in terms of cloud adoption, I think it's perhaps that we haven't moved as quickly in terms of deploying smaller systems in terms of video surveillance as a service.
Definitely a lot to think about. Thanks a lot for joining us. Nice talking to you.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Larry.
you.